Nothing could stop the Alpha King's fury, until the rejected Omega's forbidden touch. Now he wants her at any cost. Prologue. For 15 years, nothing could stop Alpha King Theron's fury. Not the strongest warriors who tried to restrain him during episodes. Not the most powerful healers who attempted to soothe the curse burning through his bloodline. Not the magic users who promised cures that never worked. When the rage rose, ancient and unstoppable, the Alpha King became something terrifying. Something that made even his most loyal guards step back with fear in their eyes. The Fury Binding had claimed his grandfather's sanity and nearly destroyed his father. Now it lived in Theron's veins like liquid fire, waiting for any moment of weakness to consume him entirely. He'd learned to build walls in his mind, to isolate himself, to avoid anything that might trigger the uncontrollable rage. But the cost was brutal. A king who couldn't touch, couldn't trust, couldn't allow anyone close enough to witness what he became when the curse took hold. He was powerful. He was feared. He was utterly, desperately alone. 300 miles away, in a pack that had forgotten her name even while she still lived there, Omega Isla Thorne stood barefoot in a ceremonial white dress that hung loose on her small frame. She was everything the world said didn't matter. Too gentle, too weak, too quiet. Her wolf barely surfaced anymore, retreating so deep inside that Isla sometimes wondered if she'd imagined having one at all. Tonight, surrounded by 300 witnesses who'd come to watch her humiliation like entertainment, Alpha Garrett proclaimed her unsuitable for mating, inadequate, unworthy, and no one spoke in her defense. No one ever did. But the moon, ancient and knowing, had been watching both of them. The cursed king drowning in fury he couldn't control. The rejected Omega who'd learned to make herself invisible just to survive. Two souls moving through darkness toward a collision neither of them saw coming. When Theron walked into that hall, drawn by instinct he didn't understand, he expected nothing. Another territory matter to handle. Another night managing the rage that always lurked beneath his skin. Instead, he saw her. Small and terrified and absolutely alone. And his wolf surged forward with recognition so fierce it stole his breath. He defended her because something ancient in his blood demanded it. He claimed her because walking away felt impossible. And when she placed her trembling hand in his, trusting him despite every reason not to, the Fury Binding shattered. 300 years of curse, broken by the forbidden touch of a rejected Omega, whose gentle wolf was the exact opposite of everything the curse had fed on. In that moment, Theron's world shifted. The rage that had defined him for 15 years simply stopped, and in its place bloomed something he'd thought impossible: peace. But peace came with a price. Because the moment he felt that gentle touch break what ancient magic couldn't, Theron knew with absolute certainty he would do anything: destroy kingdoms, defy laws, burn down the world itself, to keep this Omega who'd given him back his soul. She didn't know it yet, standing there in her rejection dress with tears threatening to fall, but she'd just become the most valuable thing in his kingdom. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would take her from him now. If you love intense stories about wolves with destiny and twists and turns, subscribe to the channel now. We post videos every day, so subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any episodes. How about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, author of the stories. And you? Comment below with your name and which city you're watching from. Chapter 1. The cold of the hall's stones pierced through the soles of Isla's bare feet like a sentence. She kept her eyes fixed on the marble floor while Alpha Garrett's voice echoed off the walls, proclaiming her inadequacy to an audience of 300 wolves who drank in her humiliation like fine wine. The ceremonial white dress, symbol of the rejected Omega, hung loose on her body, too large in the shoulders, too long at the hems, making her look exactly like what they said she was: small, weak, insufficient. Omega Isla Thorne has failed to present adequate wolf strength, Alpha Garrett announced with a poorly disguised satisfaction. Unable to complete the transformation during the last 3 full moons. Unsuitable as a mate for a beta-ranked wolf. Marcus stood 3 steps away. She could feel his presence without looking, but he wasn't looking at her either. The man who had kissed her mouth 2 months ago now pretended she was an uninteresting piece of furniture in the corner of the room. Isla's nails dug into her palms. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Does anyone speak in defense of this Omega? Garrett's question was pure formality. No one ever spoke. The silence stretched like a taut rope about to snap. Isla began counting breaths, trying to anchor herself to something other than the shame burning in her cheeks. 1, 2, 3. I do. The voice cut through the air like thunder in a clear sky. Deep, rough, carrying an authority that made every wolf in the hall freeze instantly. Isla lifted her head so fast she felt her neck crack, and her eyes found the most devastating man she'd ever seen. He occupied the entrance as if he'd been sculpted there by the moon itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, black hair falling to his shoulders, framing a face of hard lines, and a mouth that seemed to have forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that held Isla. Storm gray with silver flecks, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Behind him, 2 guards in silver armor flanked the entrance. And beyond them, the full moon seemed to shine brighter, as if the entire universe had paused to witness this moment. Your Majesty! Alpha Garrett nearly choked on the words, his face turning red. We weren't expecting... We received no word that you'd be visiting our territory. Majesty. The word reverberated in Isla's skull like an alarm bell. That was Alpha King Theron, ruler of the Northern Territories. The wolf about whom they whispered stories of incomparable power and uncontrollable fury. And he was looking at her as if she were the only person in the hall. I don't need permission to travel through territories under my protection, King Theron said, crossing the hall with steps that were pure contained predation. Wolves moved out of his way like water before a ship's prow. I felt the ceremony beginning. A rejection, if I'm not mistaken? Yes, Your Majesty, but it's a minor pack matter. You asked if anyone spoke in defense of this Omega. King Theron stopped 3 steps from Isla, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His scent enveloped her, pine and winter rain and something wild that made her wolf wake for the first time in months. I speak. I defend her. Chaos erupted. Wolves jumped from their seats, voices rising in shock and confusion. Marcus looked about to faint. Alpha Garrett opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Your Majesty, with all due respect, Garrett managed to articulate, this Omega has been evaluated by our pack's standards and found inadequate by questionable measures. Theron's eyes were liquid silver when they fixed on Garrett. Tell me, Alpha, what exactly constitutes adequate wolf strength? Because I can feel her wolf clearly, and there's nothing weak about it. Impossible. Isla's wolf had barely stirred during the last 3 moons. How could he sense what she herself couldn't? The Omega failed to transform completely during the last 3 moon ceremonies, Garrett said stiffly. A wolf who cannot shift is unsuitable for mating with a beta. It's tradition. Tradition. Theron made the word sound like an insult. Interesting. What if the wolf wasn't weak, but rather refusing to shift because something about the situation felt fundamentally wrong? The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes. Theron closed the distance to Isla, and she watched his approach with the paralyzed fascination of someone watching a storm advance. Terrifying, inevitable, strangely beautiful. When he stopped before her, so close she could see the silver threads in his storm-colored eyes, he extended his hand palm up. May I? He asked softly. And there was something so gentle in that gesture that Isla's heart constricted. All logic screamed that touching the Alpha King was madness. But her instincts, those primitive instincts that lived below reason, pushed her forward. She placed her hand in his. Heat exploded at the point of contact. It wasn't burning, but pure flame coursing through her veins like liquid fire. Isla gasped. And through the wave of sensation, she felt her wolf wake completely, not gradually, but all at once, stretching and roaring with more strength than it had ever had. Theron's eyes widened, the storm gray now ringed with brilliant gold, and his fingers closed gently around hers. Impossible, he whispered, and there was wonder in his voice. The fury binding. It's breaking. What? Isla managed to articulate, though her voice came out hoarse. But Theron wasn't looking at her anymore. He stared at their clasped hands with an expression that transitioned rapidly between shock, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously like hope. Around them, the air began to shimmer, not visibly, but in a way Isla felt in her bones, and she heard several wolves gasp. "Your Majesty?" Garrett's voice was high with nervousness. "What's happening?" Theron looked up, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "This ceremony is over. This Omega is not rejected, she's claimed. By me. As of now, she's under royal protection as my intended mate." The hall exploded in noise, but Isla barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. Mate? The Alpha King had just claimed her as his intended mate? In front of her entire pack? While she stood barefoot in a rejection dress feeling like her entire world had been turned upside down? But Isla started, then stopped because she had approximately 1,000 questions and no idea which to ask first. Theron's thumb brushed across her knuckles in a surprisingly gentle gesture for someone who looked capable of breaking the world in half. Through their joined hands, Isla felt something flow between them. Warm, steady, strangely comforting despite the absolute chaos. "I know you have questions," he said quietly, just for her beneath the crowd's noise. "I know this is sudden and confusing and probably terrifying, but I need you to trust me for just a few more minutes." "Can you do that?" Isla looked at this impossible man who had walked into her humiliation and transformed it into something completely different. Looked at the sincerity in those storm-colored eyes, felt the warmth of his hand around hers, felt her wolf pressing eagerly against her consciousness for the first time in months, as if she'd finally found something worth waking for. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I can trust you." Theron smiled, small and brief but genuine, and Isla's heart did an acrobatic flip in her chest. "Good," he said. Then louder, addressing the hall, "We'll depart for the Northern Palace immediately. Alpha Garrett, please have the Omega's belongings packed. And someone find her shoes." He turned, still holding Isla's hand, and began guiding her toward the exit. The crowd parted before them like water around a stone, wolves pressing against the walls with expressions ranging from shock to awe to, in Marcus's case, the dawning horror of someone realizing they'd just made a spectacular mistake. Behind them, Isla heard Alpha Garrett calling for attendance, heard the buzz of voices rising in speculation, heard her entire life as she'd known it crumbling like sand. But when she looked at Theron, at the man who had defended her when no one else would, who had claimed her as his intended mate before 300 witnesses, who held her hand like it was something precious, Isla felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. Terrifying. Fragile. Impossible hope. And deep inside, her wolf purred with contentment. Finally awake. Chapter 2. The Northern Palace rose from the mountainside, like something out of a dream Isla hadn't known she was having. Pale stone glowed faintly under moonlight. Gardens terraced down slopes even in early spring. Warm light spilling from countless windows. Music drifted from somewhere inside. Laughter and voices and the distant sound of what might have been a celebration. The carriage, because apparently Alpha Kings traveled in extremely comfortable carriages with cushioned seats and cedar-scented blankets, rolled to a stop at the main entrance, and Isla felt her stomach do something complicated. "It's beautiful," she whispered, surprising herself by meaning it. Theron looked at the palace like he was seeing it through her eyes. "It's home," he said, and something in his voice suggested that distinction mattered deeply. Not always peaceful, but home. Before Isla could figure out how to exit gracefully while wearing a borrowed traveling cloak over her ceremonial rejection dress, definitely not designed for actual travel, the carriage door opened and a hand appeared. Not Theron's hand, but that of a tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an intricate braid. Her amber eyes sparkled with amusement as she took in Isla's confused expression. "Your Majesty," she said, though her tone held affection rather than formality. "You've brought home a guest without warning, again. I'm beginning to think you enjoy watching the household scramble. Dame Kiara, Theron said, climbing out behind Isla with fluid grace. May I present Omega Isla Thorne, my intended mate. Isla, this is Dame Kiara Brightwood, the palace steward and the person who actually runs everything while I pretend to be in charge. Dame Kiara went very still, amber eyes widening as she looked between them. Your intended mate, she repeated slowly, testing the words. As in, properly claimed and formally announced? Properly claimed before approximately 300 witnesses, Theron confirmed. It was quite dramatic. There may have been gasping. There was definitely gasping, Isla murmured, and was rewarded with a brief smile from the king. Dame Kiara studied Isla for a long moment that felt like an examination. Then her face broke into a warm smile that transformed her entire expression. Well then, we'd better get you settled. You look exhausted, dear, and that dress, while very symbolic, I'm sure, is completely impractical. She turned and called over her shoulder. Mira, Elena, we have a very important guest. What followed was organized chaos. 2 women appeared. Mira, short and round with laugh lines around her eyes, and Elena, younger and moving with brisk efficiency. There were rapid-fire conversations about which suite to prepare. The Rose Suite is already made up, but the Starlight Suite has better morning light. The Rose Suite is closer to His Majesty's chambers. Oh, good point. And whether Isla needed food. She's far too thin, Mira declared with the confidence of someone who'd been feeding people for decades. When did you last eat properly, child? I don't remember, Isla admitted, and Mira made a sound that suggested this was a personal offense. Through it all, Theron stood slightly apart, watching with an expression that suggested he'd witnessed this performance before. When Dame Kiara finally shepherded Isla toward the entrance, Isla looked back and found him still watching her, something unreadable in those storm-colored eyes. Your Majesty, Dame Kiara said pointedly, are you planning to stand in the courtyard all evening? I'm coming, Theron said, but he fell into step beside Isla rather than leading, and his hand came to rest lightly on the small of her back, protective and possessive in equal measure. The palace interior was breathtaking. Polished wood and stone floors covered with thick rugs that felt wonderful against Isla's still bare feet. They'd never found her shoes, and she discovered she didn't particularly care. The shoes had pinched anyway. They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor, then down a hallway lined with portraits of previous Alpha Kings and Queens, all looking very serious and slightly stern. Isla caught herself wondering if Theron would eventually have his portrait hung here too, and whether she'd be in it with him. Then her brain caught up with that thought, and she had to resist hysterical laughter. 24 hours ago, she'd been preparing for rejection. Now she was speculating about royal portraits. Dame Kiara stopped at an ornately carved door and pushed it open. The Rose Suite, she announced. I know Elena argued for the Starlight Suite, but this one has a better sitting room, and I suspect you'll be doing quite a bit of talking over the next few days. The suite was stunning. A large bedroom with a bed that could comfortably sleep 4 people dominated the space, all dressed in soft rose and cream fabrics. A separate sitting room held comfortable chairs arranged around a crackling fireplace, and through another door, Isla glimpsed a bathing room with a tub large enough to swim in. This is too much, Isla heard herself say. You need somewhere comfortable to process the fact that your entire life just changed, Theron interrupted gently. And you deserve somewhere beautiful to do that processing. This isn't too much, Isla. This is exactly enough. Isla turned to look at him properly for the first time since arriving, and found him watching her with that same intensity, but softer now, more concerned than overwhelming. I know you must have questions, he continued, about what happened today, about the Fury binding, about what this all means. He paused, then added with unexpected vulnerability, about who I am when I'm not dramatically interrupting rejection ceremonies. I have approximately 1,000 questions, Isla admitted. Maybe 2,000. Then let me answer the most important ones tonight, and we'll work through the rest tomorrow. Theron moved to one of the chairs by the fire, and gestured for Isla to take the other. Dame Kiara had disappeared, probably to organize food and clothing and whatever else stewards organized, leaving them alone in the warm, fire-lit room. Isla sat carefully, very aware she was still wearing her rejection dress. Theron settled into his chair with comfortable ease, as if he'd sat there many times before. "First question," he said. "What is the Fury binding and why did it break when you touched me?" Isla nodded, grateful he was starting there because it had been echoing in her mind since their hands had joined. Theron was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. 300 years ago, my ancestor, King Aldrich the Warrior, made a deal with a powerful witch to ensure his bloodline would always have the strength to protect our territories. The magic she wove was called the Fury Binding. It gave each Alpha King incredible power during battle, enhanced strength, nearly unstoppable in combat. "That sounds useful," Isla said carefully, sensing more to the story. It was. But magic always has a price. The price of the Fury Binding was control. Each Alpha King since Aldrich has struggled with uncontrollable rage, not constant, but triggered by threats or challenges or sometimes just stress. The fury rises, and when it does, it's almost impossible to contain. He looked down at his hands, and Isla saw them curl slightly, as if remembering damage they'd done. "I've spent 15 years learning to manage it," he continued, "building walls in my mind, surrounding myself with people who know how to help, avoiding situations that might trigger it. But it's always there, lurking, always waiting for a moment of weakness." "That sounds exhausting," Isla said softly, and saw something like gratitude flash across his face. "It is. Constant vigilance, constant control, constant fear that one day I'll lose my grip and hurt someone who doesn't deserve it." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "And then you touched me, and I felt the binding break. Just like that. 300 years of family curse, shattered in a heartbeat." Isla's hand went unconsciously to her chest, where warmth from their earlier touch still lingered. "How is that possible? I'm just an Omega. I'm not powerful enough to break ancient magic. The witch who created the Fury Binding left one loophole, one condition under which the curse could be broken." Theron leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze intense. "A touch given freely by someone whose wolf nature is gentleness itself. Someone whose strength lies not in dominance, but in compassion. Someone whose very essence is the opposite of fury." Understanding began to dawn, warm and terrifying. "Your wolf," Theron continued, "is perhaps the gentlest I've ever felt. When you touched me, when your wolf reached out to mine without fear or hesitation, it did what 300 years of magic users couldn't do. It reminded my wolf what peace felt like." "That's why you claimed me," Isla said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Because I can break the curse." "No." The word was immediate and firm. Theron closed the distance between them, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. "I claimed you because the moment I felt your wolf, I knew I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life without knowing I was searching. The curse breaking was a miracle, but you, Isla, you're the real gift." Isla wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that this powerful man had seen something in her worth, claiming beyond magical convenience. But years of being told she was too weak, too gentle, too unsuitable had built walls not easily dismantled. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I could be terrible, boring. You stood before 300 wolves having the worst night of your life, and when I asked if you could trust me, you said yes." Theron's hand came up to cup her cheek, touch feather light. "That's not weakness, Isla. That's courage. And I already know I want to spend whatever time you'll give me learning everything else about you." A knock interrupted them. Dame Kiara bustled in with a tray of heavenly-smelling food, followed by Mira carrying clothing. "Food first," Dame Kiara declared. "Then proper clothes, then sleep. You both look about to fall over, and important conversations can wait until morning when everyone's brain is functioning." Theron looked like he wanted to protest, but Dame Kiara fixed him with a look that suggested she'd been managing stubborn Alpha Kings for decades. "Out," she said sweetly, Unless you plan to stay and explain your entire family history until dawn. You're a tyrant, Theron said, but there was affection in his voice. I'm efficient, there's a difference. She shooed him toward the door. The girl will still be here in the morning. Theron went, but turned back at the threshold. Sleep well. And if you need anything at all, someone will be right outside. That's not creepy at all, Isla said, and was rewarded with his laugh. Deep, genuine, surprising. Protection, not surveillance, he assured her. There's a difference. Then he was gone, and Isla was left with Dame Kiara and Mira, who made sure she ate. The food was incredible. Changed into proper night clothes, soft cotton that felt like heaven, and understood where everything was located. By the time they left, Isla's head spun with exhaustion. She climbed into the enormous bed, sinking into lavender and cedar-scented blankets, and stared up at the ceiling painted with stars. 24 hours ago, she'd been preparing for rejection. Now she lay in a palace suite as the intended mate of the Alpha King, having apparently broken a 300-year-old curse with a single touch. Life, Isla thought as sleep pulled her under, was very strange. But maybe strange wasn't the worst thing it could be. Chapter 3. Morning arrived with sunlight that seemed personally offended by Isla's desire to sleep, stabbing through the curtains she'd forgotten to close and directly into her closed eyelids with the precision of a weapon. She groaned, pulling the blanket over her head, and immediately regretted the movement when her temples throbbed in mild protest. Not from wine, she hadn't had any, but from the sheer emotional exhaustion of having her entire life upended in the span of a few hours. Then she remembered where she was. The Rose Suite, the Northern Palace, the Alpha King's intended mate. Isla sat up so fast the room spun slightly, and she gripped the edge of the blanket while her brain caught up with reality. Last night had actually happened. The rejection ceremony, Theron's dramatic entrance, the touch that had broken a 300-year-old curse, the claim that had been witnessed by her entire pack, all real, terrifyingly, impossibly real. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Isla?" A familiar voice, Mira, from last night. "Are you awake? I've brought breakfast, and Dame Kiara says you're to eat every bite before she allows you to worry about anything else." Despite everything, Isla smiled. "I'm awake. You can come in." Mira bustled through the door carrying a tray that smelled like heaven. Fresh bread, honey, fruit that looked like it had been picked this morning, and tea that steamed invitingly. She set it on the small table by the window with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this task 1,000 times. "His Majesty asked after you 3 times already this morning," Mira said cheerfully, opening the curtains fully to let in spring sunlight that was considerably less offensive when Isla was actually awake to appreciate it. "Dame Kiara finally banned him from the corridor outside your room because he was pacing like a caged wolf and disturbing the entire household." Isla's heart did something complicated at the image of the powerful Alpha King pacing nervously outside her door. Does he seem upset? Upset? Bless you, no. Nervous, maybe. Worried you'd wake up and realize you could do much better than a cursed king with questionable social skills. Mira winked. Those were his words, not mine. Dame Kiara told him he was being ridiculous and sent him to the training grounds to work off his anxiety. He said that? About himself? Isla couldn't quite reconcile the image of the commanding man from last night with someone who worried about not being good enough. "Oh, His Majesty is surprisingly self-aware when it comes to his flaws," Mira said, arranging Isla's breakfast with care. "It's one of his better qualities, actually. Now eat, before Dame Kiara sends me back to report on whether you've touched anything, and I have to admit failure." The food was incredible. The bread still warm, the honey sweet and golden, the fruit bursting with flavor. Isla ate while Mira laid out clothing on the bed. A simple but beautiful dress in soft blue that looked like it would actually fit. Undergarments that were considerably nicer than anything Isla had owned before, and boots that appeared to be made of butter-soft leather. "These can't be for me," Isla said, touching the dress fabric reverently. "This is too fine. His Majesty sent for the seamstress before dawn," Mira explained. "She estimated your measurements based on the dress you arrived in. which, if you don't mind me saying, was absolutely criminal in how poorly it fit, and worked through the night on several outfits. This one's just the first. The others will be ready by this evening. He did that while I was sleeping? Like I said, he's been up since before dawn, alternating between pacing outside your door, badgering the seamstress, and apparently demolishing half the training grounds with his anxiety. Mira smiled warmly. It's quite sweet, actually. We haven't seen him this worked up about anything in years. After breakfast, Mira prepared a bath for Isla. The tub was indeed spacious, and the hot water felt like a welcome luxury after her long journey. Isla enjoyed the privacy and warmth, and dress in the new clothes. The blue dress fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way that was flattering without being uncomfortable, and the boots felt like walking on clouds. You look beautiful, Mira said with satisfaction. His Majesty is going to forget how to form complete sentences. I thought he already had questionable social skills, Isla teased, and Mira laughed. Fair point. Come on, Dame Kiara wants to give you a tour of the palace before His Majesty returns from the training grounds and insists on monopolizing all your time. The palace was even more beautiful in daylight. Dame Kiara led Isla through corridors lined with tapestries depicting historical events, battles won, alliances forged, celebrations held. The Great Hall could seat hundreds, with a ceiling that soared 3 stories high. The library held more books than Isla had seen in her entire life, organized on shelves that reached toward skylights, letting in natural light. This is the heart of the palace, Dame Kiara explained as they entered a large kitchen where staff moved with choreographed efficiency. If you want to know what's really happening, talk to the kitchen staff. They know everything before anyone else does. A woman chopping vegetables looked up and grinned. Is this her? The Omega who broke the Fury binding? News travels fast, Isla murmured. News about the Alpha King claiming an intended mate during a rejection ceremony traveled at approximately the speed of light, another staff member said cheerfully. We had messengers arriving before midnight. The entire territory is buzzing. No pressure, Isla said weakly, and several people laughed. Don't let them intimidate you, Dame Kiara said, steering Isla back toward the corridor. They're thrilled, actually. We've been worried about His Majesty for years, watching him carry that curse alone, refusing to let anyone truly close for fear of hurting them. The fact that you broke it means he might actually allow himself to be happy. They emerged into a garden courtyard, and Isla's breath caught. Spring flowers bloomed in careful arrangements, pathways wound between raised beds, and a fountain burbled peacefully in the center. It was beautiful and alive, and exactly the kind of place where someone could think clearly. This is where His Majesty comes when he needs to calm down, Dame Kiara said softly. It was his mother's garden. She died when he was young, not from the curse, just illness. But she designed this space to be peaceful, a reminder that gentleness exists even in a world that often demands strength. Isla walked to the fountain, trailing her fingers through the cool water. He must miss her. Every day, I think. She was the one person who could always settle the fury, even before it became uncontrollable. After she passed, he had to learn to manage it alone. Dame Kiara joined her by the fountain, which is why what you did last night, breaking the binding with a single touch, is nothing short of miraculous. I didn't do anything, Isla protested. I just touched his hand. You gave him gentleness when he expected nothing. You offered trust when you had every reason to be terrified. You saw him as someone worth defending, worth reaching toward, worth believing in. Dame Kiara smiled. That's not nothing, dear. That's everything. Before Isla could respond, a commotion from the palace entrance drew their attention. Voices raised in greeting, footsteps approaching quickly, and then Theron appeared in the garden doorway, slightly breathless like he'd been running, his training clothes dusty and his hair escaping from its tie. His eyes found Isla immediately, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it made her heart ache. You're awake, he said unnecessarily, crossing to her in 3 long strides. I was told you were touring the palace, but I wasn't sure where. He stopped, seeming to realize he was babbling, and took a breath. I'm sorry. I promised myself I'd give you space, let you adjust, not overwhelm you. And then I heard you were awake and I just needed to see me? Isla finished softly and watched color rise in his cheeks. Yes, he admitted. I needed to see you. To make sure you were real. That last night actually happened. I was thinking the same thing, Isla confessed. I woke up convinced I'd dreamed the whole thing. They stood there in the garden courtyard, sunlight warm on their faces, while Dame Kiara tactfully examined the fountain like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. I should let you finish your tour, Theron said, though he didn't move. You should see the palace, meet people, get comfortable. I shouldn't monopolize your time on your first full day here. What if I want you to monopolize my time? The words came out before Isla could stop them, bold and slightly reckless. Theron's eyes widened, storm gray brightening with something that looked like joy. Then I would be honored to monopolize your time. What would you like to do? Show me your favorite place, Isla said on impulse. Not the places you're supposed to show guests. Your place. Where you go when you want to be yourself. Something shifted in Theron's expression, surprise melting into something softer, more vulnerable. He held out his hand, palm up, just like he had last night in the Moonstone Pack Hall. May I? He asked. Isla placed her hand in his, and the warmth that sparked between them felt like coming home. Follow me, Theron said, and smiled. Chapter 4. Theron led Isla up 3 flights of stairs, down a narrow corridor that looked like it was rarely used, and finally through a door that opened onto the palace's highest tower. The view stole Isla's breath. Mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks still dusted with snow that glittered in the afternoon sun. Below, the palace gardens spread like an intricate tapestry, and beyond that, forests rolled toward the horizon in waves of green. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the wind that swept across the tower carried the scent of pine and possibility. This is incredible, Isla breathed, moving to the stone railing carefully. She wasn't particularly afraid of heights, but this was definitely the highest she'd ever been. I come here when I need perspective, Theron said, joining her at the railing, but leaving enough space that she didn't feel crowded. When the curse felt like it was winning, when the responsibility of ruling felt too heavy, when I needed to remember that the world is bigger than my problems. Isla looked at him, really looked, and saw exhaustion around his eyes that hadn't been visible in the dramatic lighting of last night. Saw the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself like someone always preparing for the next crisis. How old were you when you became king? She asked. 15. My father died in an accident during a hunt. A fall. Nothing dramatic. Just tragedy in the way life sometimes offers tragedy. One moment he was alive and teaching me about territory management. The next he was gone and I was standing in front of the council being told I was now responsible for thousands of lives. That's so young, Isla said softly. Too young, probably. But there was no one else. My mother had died 3 years earlier. I had no siblings, and the law was clear about succession, so I learned quickly. He turned to lean against the railing, facing her instead of the view. I learned how to make decisions that affected entire communities, how to mediate disputes between packs, how to present strength even when I felt terrified. And I learned how to manage the fury that came with my bloodline, the curse that had killed my grandfather and nearly destroyed my father. But you didn't let it destroy you, Isla observed. I came close. There were years, especially in the beginning, when I wasn't sure I'd survive it. When the rage would rise and I'd lose hours, wake up in the training grounds having demolished everything in reach, surrounded by guards who looked at me with fear instead of respect. His voice dropped. I terrified people, the ones I was supposed to protect. That's not the kind of king anyone should have. Isla moved closer, closing the distance he'd left between them. But you didn't give up. You built walls, learned control, found ways to manage it. That takes incredible strength. Or incredible stubbornness, Theron said, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. Dame Kiara would vote for stubbornness. She's been telling me for years that I'm too stubborn to fail at anything, including managing an ancient curse. I like Dame Kiara, Isla said. She's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. That's an accurate description. She's been running this palace since before I was born, and I'm reasonably certain she could run the entire territory if needed. Possibly the entire kingdom. He paused. She likes you too, by the way. I can tell because she hasn't threatened to have you removed from the palace, which is her standard response to people she doesn't approve of. Has she had many people removed? 3 visiting nobles, 1 ambassador who was rude to the kitchen staff, and 1 extremely persistent merchant who thought selling me overpriced goods was a sound business strategy. Theron's eyes sparkled with amusement. Dame Kiara has very strong opinions about appropriate behavior. Isla laughed, and the sound seemed to startle both of them, bright and genuine in the tower's open air. Theron stared at her like she'd done something miraculous. What? Isla asked, suddenly self-conscious. You laugh beautifully, he said simply. And I just realized that in all the years I've been coming to this tower, I've never heard laughter here. It's always been my serious place, my brooding place. But hearing you laugh makes it feel different, lighter. Warmth bloomed in Isla's chest, that same warmth from when they'd first touched. I'm glad I could add laughter to your brooding tower. It's not a brooding tower, Theron protested. But he was smiling. It's a contemplative tower. There's a difference. If you say so, Your Majesty. Please don't call me that, he said suddenly. And there was real feeling behind the words. Not when we're alone. Here. In this tower, in the garden, in your rooms, anywhere that's just us. I'm just Theron. Not Your Majesty, not the Alpha King, not the ruler of territories. Just me. Isla studied his face, saw the vulnerability there, the hope. Just Theron. She repeated softly. I can do that. Relief washed over his expression. Thank you. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Isla found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since, well, possibly ever. There was something about this tower, this view, this man beside her, that made her feel safe enough to just exist without performing or pretending. Can I ask you something? Theron said eventually. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. You can ask. Last night, when I walked into that hall and saw you standing there, you looked completely alone despite being surrounded by 300 wolves. Like you'd accepted that no one would speak for you. No one would defend you. How long have you felt that alone? The question hit deeper than Isla expected, and she had to take a moment to breathe through the sudden tightness in her throat. Always, I think, she finally admitted. I was born the smallest Omega in my pack, the weakest, the one who never quite fit anywhere. My parents loved me, but they didn't understand me. My siblings were all stronger, more capable, more everything. And after my parents died 3 years ago, there was no one left who even pretended I mattered. Marcus? Theron's voice held carefully controlled anger. Marcus paid attention to me for a few months, and I mistook attention for affection. I thought maybe someone finally saw me as worth choosing. But he was just... She stopped, searching for words. He was just proving he could catch an Omega's interest, I think. When it came time to actually commit, when his family started questioning whether I was suitable, he folded immediately. He's an idiot, Theron said flatly. And so is everyone in your pack who couldn't see what was right in front of them. Maybe I was just good at hiding, Isla offered. Being small, being quiet, not demanding attention or space or consideration. Or maybe they were just bad at seeing. Theron turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his storm-colored eyes made her breath catch. Because I saw you immediately, Isla. The moment I entered that hall, before I even understood what was happening, I felt your wolf calling to mine. Gentle and strong and absolutely beautiful. That's not something you hid. That's something they were too blind to recognize. Tears pricked Isla's eyes. Not sad tears, but the overwhelming kind that came from being truly seen for the first time in memory. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brave. You touched my hand when you had every reason to be afraid. I know you're kind. I felt it in the way your wolf reached out to mine with no hesitation, no judgment. I know you're honest. You told me you could trust me even though trusting a stranger who'd just upended your life was terrifying. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. And I know I want to learn everything else. Every favorite food, every fear, every dream you've had, every moment that shaped you into the person standing in front of me. That might take a while, Isla whispered. I have time. Theron's hand came up slowly, giving her every opportunity to move away, and cupped her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. I have all the time you're willing to give me. Isla leaned into his touch without thinking, and watched his eyes darken with emotion. The air between them felt charged, full of possibility and promise, and something that might have been destiny if she believed in such things. Theron, she said, testing his name on her tongue, liking the way it felt. Can I ask you something now? Anything. But what happens next? I mean, you claimed me as your intended mate, but what does that actually mean? What do people expect? What do you expect? What I expect, Theron said carefully, is that we take this at whatever pace feels right to you. Intended mate means we're publicly committed to exploring the possibility of a permanent bond. But it doesn't require anything immediate beyond spending time together, getting to know each other, seeing if what we felt last night, that connection, that recognition, is something that can grow into more. And if it doesn't? Isla had to ask, even though something deep inside her already whispered that it would. If we realize we're not actually compatible, then we're honest about it and figure out what comes next together. Though, he paused, thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture that made her shiver. I don't think that's going to be a problem, do you? No, Isla admitted. I don't think it will be. Theron smiled, and it transformed his entire face from serious and handsome to absolutely devastating. Good. Then for now, let's just focus on this, on getting to know each other, on letting you settle into the palace and meet people and find your place here. Everything else can wait. Everything else like what? Like the formal presentation to the territory leaders, the official bonding ceremony, the inevitable questions about heirs and succession. He grimaced. All the parts of being with an alpha king that are considerably less romantic than standing in a tower watching clouds. Those parts sound terrifying, Isla said honestly. They are, but we'll face them together, and I promise I won't let anyone make you feel small or insufficient or anything other than exactly what you are. Remarkable. His hand dropped from her face, but he caught her hand instead, lacing their fingers together. For now, though, are you hungry? Because I just realized I ran up here without thinking about the fact that you might want lunch. As if on cue, Isla's stomach growled audibly, and Theron laughed, deep and genuine and wonderful. Come on, he said, tugging her gently toward the tower door. Let's get you fed before Dame Kiara sends a search party and lectures me about proper care of intended mates. They descended the stairs hand in hand, and Isla found herself smiling at nothing in particular, feeling lighter than she had in years. Maybe strange wasn't the worst thing life could be. Maybe strange, with the right person beside you, was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. Chapter 5. Lunch was served in a small dining room that Theron explained was reserved for family meals. Intimate compared to the grand hall, with windows overlooking the garden and a table that could seat maybe 20 people, but felt cozy with just the two of them. Dame Kiara had outdone herself. The table held roasted chicken with herbs that made Isla's mouth water, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, vegetables glazed with something sweet and savory, and a berry tart that looked almost too beautiful to eat. This is incredible, Isla said, trying not to shovel food into her mouth like someone who'd been starving, which, honestly, she kind of had been. The Moonstone Pack hadn't exactly prioritized feeding their inadequate Omega generously. Dame Kiara believes food solves most problems, Theron said, watching her eat with an expression that looked suspiciously satisfied. She's not entirely wrong. It's hard to be miserable while eating her cooking. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Theron said, I should probably tell you about the people you'll be meeting over the next few days. The territory can be overwhelming if you don't know who's who. Territory leaders? Isla guessed, remembering his earlier mention of formal presentations. Among others, there are 5 major packs within the Northern Territory. each with their own alpha and council. They're not subjects exactly, more like allies who've sworn loyalty to the crown in exchange for protection and resources. They'll want to meet you, assess whether you're suitable as their future queen. Isla's stomach dropped, despite the delicious food. That sounds terrifying. It would be if I was going to let them intimidate you. Which I'm not. Theron's voice held steel beneath the gentleness. You're under my protection, Isla. That means something here. They can meet you, they can form opinions, but they will treat you with respect or answer to me. You can't just threaten people into respecting me. Isla protested. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply making expectations clear. His eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. There's a difference. Besides, I have a feeling you won't need my interference. People tend to underestimate gentle strength until it's staring them in the face. You have a lot of faith in someone you just met. I have faith in what I felt when you touched me, in the courage it took to trust a stranger, in the way your wolf called to mine without hesitation. He paused, then added more softly, and I have faith in my instincts, which have kept me alive and ruling for 15 years, despite a curse that should have destroyed me. Put that way, Isla found it harder to argue. After lunch, Theron took her to meet the palace's inner circle, the people he trusted most. First was Commander Ash, head of the Royal Guard, a tall woman with scars on her arms and eyes that missed nothing. She studied Isla with the intensity of someone assessing a potential threat, then apparently decided Isla passed whatever test she was conducting. She broke the Fury binding, Ash said to Theron, as if Isla wasn't standing right there. That true? Completely true. Good. Maybe now you'll stop demolishing the training grounds every time you have a bad day. Ash turned to Isla, and her expression softened fractionally. Welcome to the palace, Miss Isla. If anyone gives you trouble, you let me know. I'll handle it. Thank you, Isla managed, slightly overwhelmed. Next was Master Benedict, the palace healer, an elderly man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly with age. Finally, he said when Theron introduced them, I've been telling His Majesty for years that he needed someone gentle to balance all that fury. Nice to know the universe was listening. Then there was Lady Helena, who managed diplomatic relations with neighboring territories. She was elegant and sharp-eyed, assessing Isla with the practiced gaze of someone who read people for a living. You'll need training, she said bluntly. Court etiquette, diplomatic protocols, proper forms of address. But you have good instincts. I can tell. We'll work with that. I'm not sure I have good instincts, Isla admitted. You trusted His Majesty when logic said not to. That's excellent instinct. Helena smiled, and it transformed her serious face. You'll do fine, dear. Just be yourself and let us handle the complicated parts. By the time they'd finished the rounds of introductions, Isla's head was spinning with names and titles, and the dawning realization that she'd somehow stepped into a life that was infinitely more complex than anything she'd imagined. Overwhelmed? Theron asked as they walked back through the garden, the afternoon sun starting its descent toward the mountains. Completely, Isla admitted. But also, less terrified than I expected? Everyone's been kind. Well, except Commander Ash, who I think was deciding whether to approve of me or throw me in the dungeon. Ash doesn't have a gentle bone in her body, but she's fiercely loyal. If she didn't approve, you'd know. Theron guided them to a bench beneath a flowering tree that was just starting to bloom. She lost her entire pack to raiders when she was young. Barely escaped with her life. She doesn't trust easily, but once you have her loyalty, it's absolute. That's heartbreaking, Isla said softly. It is, but she rebuilt herself into one of the strongest wolves I know. She's the reason I survived the early years after my father died, kept me alive through the worst of the Fury episodes, never gave up on me even when I'd given up on myself. They sat in comfortable silence, watching butterflies dance among the flowers. The palace felt less overwhelming from here, more like a place where people lived and laughed and built lives, rather than some imposing fortress of responsibility. Can I tell you something? Isla said eventually. Something that might sound strange? Stranger than an Omega breaking a 300-year-old curse with a touch? I doubt it, but try me. I feel safe here. Which is bizarre because logically, I should be terrified. I'm in a strange place surrounded by people I don't know, claimed by a king I met yesterday, expected to become someone important when I've spent my whole life being nobody. But somehow, I feel safer than I ever did in the Moonstone Pack. Theron turned to look at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. You are safe here. I swear it. This palace, these people, me, we will protect you. Not because you're useful, not because you broke a curse, but because you're you. Because you deserve safety and respect and every good thing that was denied to you before. You barely know me, Isla whispered, but it sounded less like an argument and more like wonder. Then we'll fix that. Theron took her hand, thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Tell me something about you that no one else knows. Something real. Isla thought for a moment, then said, I talk to the moon sometimes. Late at night, when everyone's asleep, I tell her about my day, my fears, my hopes. I know it's silly, the moon can't actually hear me, but it makes me feel less alone. That's not silly, Theron said quietly. The moon is sacred to our kind. Maybe she does hear you. Maybe that's why she guided you here. Do you talk to her? Sometimes. Usually to apologize for whatever destruction the Fury caused. To promise I'll do better. He smiled ruefully. She's very patient with me. I think she brought us together, Isla said impulsively. Last night, the way the moon seemed brighter when you walked into the hall, I noticed that. It felt significant. It was significant. It was the most significant moment of my life. Theron shifted closer, close enough that their shoulders touched. Your turn to ask me something. Anything you want to know. What scares you? Isla asked. Not the curse or responsibility. Something deeper. Theron was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, becoming my grandfather. He was consumed by the Fury eventually. Lost himself completely to the rage until there was nothing left of the man he'd been. Just violence and anger and destruction. They had to. He swallowed hard. They had to restrain him permanently for everyone's safety. For everyone's safety. I'm terrified that one day, no matter how much control I build, I'll end up the same way. But you won't, Isla said with certainty. Because you have something he didn't. What's that? Me. She squeezed his hand. You have me, and I broke the curse. The Fury is gone, Theron. You don't have to carry that fear anymore. He looked at her like she'd offered him the moon itself. I keep forgetting, he admitted. 15 years of managing the curse and suddenly it's just gone. My wolf feels different, calmer, like he's been holding his breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. How does it feel? Isla asked. The difference? Like freedom, Theron said simply. Like waking up from a nightmare and realizing it's morning. Like hope. He raised their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Gentle and reverent. Like you gave me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. Isla's heart stuttered at the gesture, at the raw honesty in his voice. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special. You were exactly yourself. Gentle, brave, kind. And that was enough to break what 300 years of magic couldn't touch. His thumb brushed over where he'd kissed. That's magic of its own kind, Isla. The most powerful kind. The sun was setting now, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber. Birds settled into trees for the night, their songs softening to lullabies. The air smelled like growing things and possibility. I should let you rest, Theron said reluctantly. You've had an overwhelming day, and tomorrow will bring more. You need sleep. I'm not tired, Isla protested, even though she could feel exhaustion pulling at the edges of her consciousness. You're swaying where you sit, Theron said with gentle amusement. Come on, I'll walk you to your rooms. He was right, of course. The moment Isla stood, she realized how tired she actually was. Emotionally, physically, in every possible way. The past 24 hours had been more intense than the entire previous year combined. Theron guided her through the palace, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. When they reached the Rose Suite, he stopped at the door rather than following her inside. Sleep well, he said. And Isla? Thank you. For what? For trusting me. For being brave. For laughing in my tower and making it less lonely. He smiled, soft and genuine. For being exactly who you are. Then he was gone, striding down the corridor before she could respond, leaving Isla standing in the doorway, feeling like her heart was too full for her chest. She prepared for bed in a daze, climbed between the soft sheets, and stared at the painted stars on the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, territory leaders to meet, protocols to learn, a life to build in a world she barely understood. But tonight, wrapped in cedar-scented blankets in a palace that was starting to feel like home, Isla smiled at the moon through her window and whispered, "Thank you." The moon, as always, didn't answer. But somewhere in the palace, she knew, Theron was probably whispering the same words. Chapter 6. The next morning brought visitors. Isla was barely awake, still in her nightclothes, hair an absolute disaster. When Dame Kiara swept into the Rose Suite with an expression that suggested something important was happening, and Isla needed to be presentable immediately. "The Shadowpine Alpha is here," Dame Kiara announced, already pulling dresses from the wardrobe with practiced efficiency. "Arrived an hour ago demanding an audience with His Majesty and insisting on meeting you. Alpha Vera doesn't do subtle." "Who's Alpha Vera?" Isla asked, trying to wake up faster through sheer force of will. "Leader of the Shadowpine Pack, largest pack in the territory, most influential, and most likely to cause problems if she decides she doesn't approve of you." Dame Kiara thrust a dress at Isla. Deep green this time, with silver embroidery at the collar. She's not unkind, just direct. Very direct. Some would say aggressively direct. That sounds terrifying. It is. But you'll be fine. His Majesty is already in a mood because Vera showed up unannounced, so the real entertainment will be watching them verbally spar. Dame Kiara helped Isla dress with military efficiency, then attacked her hair with a brush. "Just be yourself, answer honestly, and don't let her intimidate you. Wolves respect strength, even gentle strength." 20 minutes later, Isla found herself in a formal receiving room she hadn't seen during yesterday's tour. Theron stood by the windows, arms crossed and expression stormy, while a tall woman with iron-gray hair and eyes like steel lounged in one of the chairs with the casual confidence of someone who feared absolutely nothing. "Ah," the woman, Alpha Vera, said when Isla entered. "The mysterious Omega who broke the Fury binding. Come closer, child. Let me see what all the fuss is about." "Isla isn't a curiosity to be examined," Theron said sharply. "She's my intended mate and deserves respect." "I'm showing respect by actually coming to meet her," Vera countered. "I could have sent judgmental letters like the other alphas will. Instead, I got on a horse at dawn and rode through terrible weather to see for myself. That's respect, Theron." "It's nosiness dressed up as concern," Theron muttered, but there was grudging affection beneath the irritation. Isla crossed to where Vera sat and did something impulsive. She bowed slightly, the gesture respectful but not subservient. "Alpha Vera, thank you for coming. I'm honored to meet you." Vera's eyebrows rose. "Good manners. Interesting. Most Omegas are too intimidated by me to manage polite greetings." She gestured to a nearby chair. "Sit. Talk to me. I want to know what kind of person managed to do what centuries of magic couldn't." Isla sat, very aware of Theron's tense presence by the window, and Dame Kiara hovering near the door like a protective sentinel. "I didn't do anything remarkable," Isla said honestly. "I just touched his hand." "Just touched his hand," Vera repeated with obvious skepticism. "The Fury binding has existed for 300 years. Kings have consulted with witches, healers, magic users of every kind trying to break it. And you just touched his hand and it shattered. Forgive me if I find that suspiciously simple." "The curse had a condition," Theron interjected. "A touch given freely by someone whose wolf nature is pure gentleness. Isla fulfilled that condition. Pure gentleness." Vera studied Isla like she was a puzzle to solve. "That's a dangerous thing to be in a world full of teeth and claws. How have you survived this long being purely gentle?" "I don't know that I am purely gentle," Isla said carefully. "I've had to be strong in my own ways." Survival requires strength, just not always the kind people recognize. Something shifted in Vera's expression, interest sharpening into approval. Explain. Being gentle doesn't mean being weak. It means choosing compassion when cruelty would be easier, offering trust when fear would be safer, finding strength in connection rather than domination. Isla met Vera's steel-gray eyes steadily. My wolf is gentle, yes, but gentle wolves are survivors too. We just survive differently. Silence filled the room for a long moment. Then Vera threw back her head and laughed, loud and genuine and surprisingly warm. I like her, she announced to Theron. She's got spine hidden under all that gentleness. That's good. She'll need it if she's going to survive being queen. I haven't agreed to be queen, Isla said before she could stop herself. Haven't you? Vera leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You accepted his claim. You came to his palace. You're sitting here talking to me instead of running screaming back to whatever pack raised you. That sounds like agreement to me. I agreed to explore the possibility, Isla clarified, to get to know him, to see if what we felt was real or just magical coincidence. And? Vera pressed. What have you learned in... She glanced at Theron. How long has it been? 2 days? 1.5 days, Theron said dryly. She arrived last night. 1.5 days, Vera repeated, looking delighted. And already you're defending her like a mate bond is fully formed. This is fascinating. So tell me, young Omega, what have you learned about our brooding Alpha King in 1.5 days? Isla considered the question seriously. I've learned he's kinder than people think, that he carries responsibility like it's both an honor and a burden, that he's terrified of becoming someone he's not, that he's lonely in ways he doesn't admit out loud. She glanced at Theron, who was staring at her with an unreadable expression. And I've learned that gentleness recognizes gentleness, even when it's buried under layers of necessary strength. Vera nodded slowly. Good answer. Honest answer. Now tell me this. What are you afraid of? Everything, Isla admitted. I'm afraid I'll fail at being whatever people expect me to be. Afraid I'll disappoint him. Afraid this feeling between us is just the aftermath of breaking a curse and will fade when reality sets in. Afraid everyone will realize I'm just a weak Omega playing at being important. That's a lot of fear for someone who just gave me a speech about survival strength, Vera observed, but her tone wasn't unkind. Fear doesn't negate strength, Isla said quietly. It just makes strength more necessary. Vera smiled, genuine and approving. You'll need training, obviously. Court protocols and pack dynamics and how to manage alphas who think they can intimidate you. But you've got the foundation. She stood, moving with the fluid grace of a predator despite her age. His Majesty chose well, whether by instinct or magic or divine intervention. All three, probably, Theron said, finally moving from the window to stand beside Isla's chair. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, protective and possessive. Isla exceeded every expectation I didn't know I had. Sweet, Vera said, though her eyes glinted with amusement. Almost sickeningly sweet. I approve. Now, are you going to offer me breakfast, or did I ride through dawn rain for nothing? Dame Kiara stepped forward smoothly. Breakfast is already prepared, Alpha Vera, if you'll follow me. As Vera strode out with Dame Kiara, Isla sagged slightly in her chair, adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Theron's hand squeezed her shoulder gently. You were magnificent, he said quietly. Honest and brave and exactly yourself. Vera respects very few people, and I could see she respected you by the end. I was terrified the entire time. I know. That's what made it brave. He moved to kneel beside her chair, bringing them eye level. I'm sorry I wasn't more help. Vera enjoys putting people on the spot, and I didn't want to interfere unless you needed me to. You let me handle it myself, Isla realized. You trusted me to hold my own. Always. His hand came up to cup her cheek. You're stronger than you know, Isla. I see it. Vera sees it. Everyone who meets you will see it. One day, maybe you'll see it too. Isla leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his steady presence. Thank you. For what? For believing in me when I don't quite believe in myself yet. Theron smiled, soft and warm. That's easy. You're worth believing in. They stayed like that for a moment. Him kneeling beside her chair, her leaning into his touch, the morning sun streaming through windows and painting everything in shades of gold, and Isla felt something shift inside her. Maybe she could do this. Maybe being queen wasn't about being perfect or powerful, or anything other than being exactly who she was. Maybe gentle strength was exactly what this kingdom needed. And maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 7. The week that followed. Alpha Vera's visit became a whirlwind of introductions, lessons, and moments that made Isla's head spin with their intensity. Lady Helena proved to be a patient but demanding teacher, drilling Isla on proper forms of address until she could recite them in her sleep. Alpha Dominic of Northridge prefers his full title at formal gatherings, but finds it pretentious otherwise. Alpha Marcus, no relation to your former intended, thankfully, appreciates directness and will respect you more if you skip the flowery language. Alpha Sienna is traditional and expects full protocol at all times. Isla's brain felt like it might explode with information. Commander Ash took her to the training grounds one morning, claiming everyone in the palace should know basic self-defense. You're gentle, not helpless, Ash said bluntly. There's a difference. Gentle wolves can still protect themselves when needed. The training was exhausting but oddly empowering. Ayla discovered she was faster than she looked, and her small size meant she could dodge attacks that would catch larger wolves. By the end of the session, she was sweating and breathless, but Ash actually smiled, a rare sight apparently. You've got good instincts, Ash said. Trust them more. Through it all, Theron was a constant presence. He joined her for breakfast each morning, walked with her through the gardens in the afternoons, spent evenings in the library teaching her about territory history. He was patient when she struggled with protocols, encouraging when she doubted herself, and protective without being overbearing. And slowly, carefully, Isla felt herself falling. Not the desperate, grasping love she'd mistaken with Marcus, but something deeper. Something that felt like coming home after a long journey. Something that made her wolf purr with contentment whenever he was near. One evening, a week after her arrival, Theron took her back to his tower. Their tower now, he'd started calling it. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, and they sat on the stone floor with their backs against the wall, shoulders touching. Tell me about your parents, Theron said quietly. You mentioned they died, but you haven't talked about them beyond that. Isla was quiet for a moment, gathering memories that still hurt despite 3 years of distance. My mother was gentle like me, an omega who loved growing things. She could make flowers bloom in winter somehow. My father was a beta, strong but kind. He protected her fierceness, if that makes sense. Let her be exactly who she was without apology. They sound wonderful. They were. They died during a fever outbreak. It swept through the pack quickly, took 30 wolves in 2 weeks. I survived only because I was visiting my grandmother in another territory when it hit. Her voice cracked slightly. I came home to find them both gone. Theron's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close against his side. I'm sorry. Losing parents? I understand that pain. It changes you. It made me smaller, Isla admitted. After they died, I had no one to defend me. No one to say I mattered. So I started believing I didn't. Started making myself invisible so no one would notice how inadequate I was. You were never inadequate, Theron said fiercely. You were grieving and alone and doing your best to survive. There's nothing inadequate about survival. Isla turned to look at him, and in the fading light, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. Beautiful and fierce, and somehow hers. How do you always know the right thing to say? I don't. I just say what I'm thinking and hope it helps. His hand came up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, fingers lingering against her cheek. You make me want to say the right things. Make me want to be better than I am. You're already pretty impressive, Isla said, trying to lighten the moment before the emotion became too overwhelming. I demolished 3 training dummies yesterday because a visiting alpha suggested you weren't suitable as queen. Ash had to physically remove me from the grounds. He grimaced. So maybe impressive isn't the word you're looking for. You defended me? Of course I defended you. He insulted you. My wolf wanted to tear him apart. Theron's jaw tightened at the memory. But I didn't. I channeled it into training equipment destruction instead. That's progress, right? That's definitely progress, Isla agreed, though warmth bloomed in her chest at the knowledge that he'd defended her so fiercely. What did this alpha say? Nothing worth repeating. Let's just say he has traditional views about Omega capabilities, and I educated him on why those views are idiotic. Theron's expression softened. You should have seen Ash. She backed me up with the kind of verbal dismantling that made the alpha actually apologize. It was beautiful. I like Ash, Isla said. She's terrifying but wonderful. That's her brand. Terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. He shifted slightly, turning to face her more fully. Can I ask you something? Always. Are you happy here? Really happy? Not just making the best of a strange situation? Isla considered the question seriously. I'm happier than I've been in years, she said honestly. Maybe ever. Is it overwhelming? Yes. Am I still sometimes convinced I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream? Absolutely. But happy? Yes, Theron. I'm happy. His smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and absolutely beautiful. Good. That's really good. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Isla found herself memorizing this moment, the warmth of his arm around her shoulders, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way the wind carried the scent of pine and growing things from the forests below. Isla, Theron said eventually, and something in his voice made her look up. His eyes were storm gray and serious, and her heart started beating faster. I know we've only known each other for a week. I know this has all been incredibly fast, but I need you to know something. What? She whispered. I'm falling in love with you. Actually, I think I started falling the moment you touched my hand and trusted me despite every reason not to. And I know it's too soon to say that. I know you might not feel the same way. But I needed you to know, because I don't want there to be any secrets between us. Isla's breath caught in her throat. Every logical part of her brain insisted this was too fast, too intense, too impossible. But her heart, her traitorous, hopeful heart, was singing. It's not too soon, she heard herself say. Because I'm falling too. Have been falling since you walked into that hall and defended me when no one else would. Since you showed me your tower and trusted me with your fears. Since you made me believe I might actually be worth choosing. You are worth choosing, Theron said fiercely. You're worth everything. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his forehead to hers. They breathed the same air, existing in the same space, and Isla felt the connection between them strengthen. Not the magical breaking of a curse, but something deeper, something real and chosen and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. Can I kiss you? Theron whispered. Please, Isla breathed. The kiss was gentle, soft and careful, and achingly sweet. His lips met hers with reverence, a tender connection that spoke of deep care and affection. Isla's hand came up to cup his jaw, feeling the slight stubble there, and kissed him back with all the emotion she couldn't quite put into words. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Theron rested his forehead against hers again. That was, he started. Perfect, Isla finished. That was perfect. They stayed in the tower until the moon rose full and bright, talking and kissing and building something between them that felt unshakable. And when Theron finally walked her back to the rose suite, his hand warm and steady in hers, Isla realized something important. She wasn't falling anymore. She'd already fallen, completely and irrevocably, for the Alpha King who'd seen her worth when no one else had. And judging by the way he looked at her, like she was his moon and stars and everything in between, he'd fallen just as hard. Chapter 8, the official presentation to the territory leaders was scheduled for Isla's second week at the palace, and despite everyone's reassurances that she'd be fine, Isla was absolutely terrified. You've already won over Vera. Theron reminded her for the third time that morning while she paced the rose suite in her formal gown. Deep blue silk with silver embroidery that made her feel like royalty, even though her stomach was doing acrobatics. And Vera is the hardest one. The others will follow her lead. What if they don't? What if they decide I'm unsuitable and demand you choose someone else? Isla's voice pitched higher with each word. Theron crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her hands, stilling her frantic pacing. Then I'll remind them that I'm the Alpha King, and I choose my own mate. Isla, look at me. She met his storm-gray eyes, finding steady certainty there. You are exactly who I want, exactly who this territory needs. And no amount of alpha posturing will change that. His thumbs brushed across her knuckles soothingly. Besides, you've been preparing for this all week. Helena says you've mastered protocols faster than anyone she's taught. Ash says your instincts are excellent. Even Benedict commented on your natural diplomatic grace, and he never compliments anyone. Benedict said I had a kind face and would probably survive formal dinners without causing incidents. Isla corrected. That's not exactly high praise. From Benedict, that's practically a declaration of love. Theron smiled, trying to coax one from her. You're going to be amazing. Just be yourself. That's always been enough. Dame Kiara appeared in the doorway, looking satisfied with something. They're ready for you in the Great Hall. All 5 alphas are present, along with their advisors. Quite the crowd. Isla's stomach dropped. Wonderful. An audience for my inevitable failure. No failure today, Dame Kiara said firmly. Only success. Now come along. We can't keep the territorial leaders waiting. They get cranky when their schedules are disrupted. The walk to the Great Hall felt simultaneously too long and too short. Theron kept his hand at the small of Isla's back, steadying, protective, silently offering strength. When they reached the massive doors, he leaned down to whisper in her ear. Remember, you broke a 300-year-old curse with a touch. Meeting a few alphas is nothing compared to that. Then the doors opened, and they entered together. The Great Hall was intimidating in its grandeur. High ceilings soared overhead, banners from each pack territory hung from the walls, and at the far end, 5 chairs were arranged in a semicircle, each occupied by an alpha whose presence filled the room with power. Isla recognized Vera immediately. The Shadowpine alpha sat with casual confidence, a slight smile playing at her lips. The others she knew only from Helena's descriptions. Alpha Dominic of Northridge, tall and silver-haired with shrewd eyes. Alpha Sienna of Eastmarch, elegant and formal with her dark hair in elaborate braids. Alpha Marcus of Westwild. Helena had been right about no relation to Isla's former intended, broad-shouldered and direct in his assessment. And Alpha Kai of Southbrook, youngest of the 5 with sharp features and an expression that missed nothing. Alpha King Theron. Dominic spoke first, his voice carrying authority. Thank you for calling this gathering. We're eager to meet your intended mate. Theron's hand pressed gently against Isla's back, and she stepped forward, keeping her chin up despite her thundering heart. Alphas of the Northern Territory, she said, proud that her voice came out steady. I'm honored to meet you all. Thank you for traveling here. The honor is ours, Sienna said, studying Isla with intense focus. We've heard remarkable stories about you, Omega Isla. That you broke the Fury binding with a single touch. Is this true? It is true, Isla confirmed, though I didn't do anything intentional. I simply touched King Theron's hand, and the curse responded to whatever my wolf represents. Gentleness, Vera interjected, looking amused. Pure gentleness, according to the curse's conditions. Quite the contrast to our usually stern Alpha King. Complementary rather than contrasting, Isla said carefully. Strength takes many forms. His Majesty's strength has protected this territory for 15 years. Perhaps mine can offer something different. Not better or worse, just different. Alpha Kai leaned forward, interest sharp in his eyes. Different how? What exactly can gentle strength offer that traditional power cannot? This was the question Helena had prepared her for. Isla took a breath and let instinct guide her words. Traditional strength commands respect through force. Gentle strength earns it through understanding. Traditional strength protects through dominance. Gentle strength protects through connection. Both have value, but a kingdom needs balance. Wolves strong enough to defend it and wolves compassionate enough to care for it. I hope to offer the latter. Silence filled the hall for a long moment. Then Marcus laughed, deep and genuine. She's got spirit beneath that gentleness. I like it. As do I, Dominic agreed. Though I'm curious, you come from the Moonstone Pack, correct? The pack that rejected you as unsuitable. Isla's chest tightened, but she kept her expression calm. Yes, I was deemed inadequate as a mate for their beta. Their loss is clearly our gain, Kai said dryly. Any pack foolish enough to reject someone who could break the Fury binding deserves whatever mediocrity they end up with. More than that, Sienna added, her formal expression softening slightly. Any pack that would publicly humiliate an Omega for failing to meet arbitrary standards of strength has questionable judgment. We don't need that kind of leadership in our territory. Isla blinked in surprise. Were they defending her? The Moonstone Pack has always been traditionalist to a fault, Vera said with obvious disdain. Perhaps this incident will encourage them to reconsider their outdated values. Or perhaps will reconsider their standing in the territory. That's not necessary, Isla said quickly. They were unkind, but I don't want them punished on my behalf. That wouldn't be fair. The 5 alphas exchanged glances that suggested some kind of silent communication was happening. Finally, Dominic spoke. You defend wolves who humiliated you. That shows remarkable grace. Or remarkable naivety, Marcus countered, but his tone wasn't unkind. Time will tell which. I prefer to believe grace, Sienna said. We have enough ruthlessness in our territories. Compassion is rarer and therefore more valuable. Kai stood, crossing to where Isla stood with Theron. He moved with predator grace, and Isla fought the urge to step back. When he stopped in front of her, his sharp eyes studied her face with unnerving intensity. You'll face challenges, he said bluntly. Wolves who see gentleness as weakness. Packs who question whether you're strong enough to be queen. Enemies, because Alpha Kings always have enemies, who might try to use you as leverage against His Majesty. Can you handle that? I don't know, Isla admitted honestly, but I'm willing to try, and I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to be exactly who I am even when that's inconvenient or disappointing to others. Kai's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. Honest answer. Better than false bravado. He extended his hand, a gesture of equality rather than dominance. Welcome to the territory, Omega Isla. I look forward to seeing what you accomplish. Isla took his hand, feeling the strength there, and shook it firmly. One by one, the other alphas approached and offered similar gestures. Acceptance into their coalition. Acknowledgement of her place beside their king. When Vera came last, she pulled Isla into an unexpected hug instead of offering her hand. Told you you'd do fine, she murmured. Trust yourself more, young Omega. You're stronger than you know. After the formal presentations ended and the alphas departed for refreshments, Theron pulled Isla into a quiet alcove, his face bright with pride. You were magnificent, he said, cupping her face in both hands. Better than magnificent. You won them over completely. I was honest, Isla said, still slightly dazed. I didn't know what else to be. Honesty is exactly what they needed. What I need. What this entire territory needs. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, tender and reverent. I love you, Isla. More than I thought possible after only 2 weeks. I love you too, Isla whispered, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Even though it's fast and probably crazy. The best things usually are, Theron said, and kissed her properly, deep and claiming and full of promise. Outside the alcove, Isla could hear the celebration beginning. But here, in this quiet moment with the man she loved, everything felt exactly right. She'd found her place, her purpose, her home, and it felt like magic. Chapter 9. 3 months after Isla's arrival at the Northern Palace, trouble arrived in the form of Alpha Garrett and Marcus. Isla was in the garden with Dame Kiara, learning about the medicinal herbs Theron's mother had planted. when Commander Ash appeared with an expression that promised nothing good. "The Moonstone Pack Alpha has requested an urgent audience," Ash said, her tone clipped. "He brought his son. His Majesty is displeased." Isla's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard from her former pack since that night, hadn't wanted to. The thought of facing Garrett and Marcus now, when she'd finally built something beautiful here, made her hands shake. "You don't have to see them," Dame Kiara said immediately, reading her distress. "His Majesty can handle this alone." "No." Isla straightened her spine, drawing on 3 months of training and growth. "I should be there. Whatever they want. I'm not that frightened Omega anymore. I won't hide." Ash's smile was fierce with approval. "Good. Let's remind them what they lost." The throne room, a space Isla rarely entered, felt imposing with its high ceilings and the massive chair where Theron sat, radiating barely controlled fury. Not the curse's fury, Isla realized immediately, but righteous anger at wolves who'd hurt his mate. His eyes found hers the moment she entered, and some of the tension in his shoulders eased. Alpha Garrett stood before the throne flanked by Marcus, both looking significantly less confident than they had 3 months ago. Garrett's face was pale, and Marcus couldn't seem to meet anyone's eyes. "Omega Isla," Garrett said, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. "How wonderful to see you looking so, well?" "Alpha Garrett, Marcus." Isla's voice came out steady, cool. "What brings you to the Northern Palace?" "We've come to, that is, we wanted to." Garrett stumbled over his words, clearly uncomfortable. "We'd like to formally apologize for the rejection ceremony. It was handled poorly, and we realize now that our assessment of your suitability was flawed." "Flawed," Theron repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "You publicly humiliated my mate, declared her inadequate before hundreds of witnesses, and now you call it flawed?" "Your Majesty, we didn't know," Garrett began. "Didn't know what? That she would break a 300-year-old curse? That she would become my intended queen?" Theron's voice cut like steel. "Or did you simply not know that Omegas have value beyond what you can measure in physical strength?" Marcus finally looked up, and Isla saw genuine regret in his eyes. "Isla, I'm sorry. Truly, I was a coward. I let my father's opinions matter more than what I felt, and I hurt you. You deserved better." It was probably the most honest thing Marcus had ever said to her. Isla felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the release of old pain. "You're right," she said simply. "I did deserve better. I deserved someone who would defend me, who would see my worth, who would choose me even when it was inconvenient." She moved to stand beside Theron's throne, and his hand immediately found hers. "Fortunately, I found exactly that. We're hoping to rebuild relations between our packs," Garrett said quickly, sensing an opening. "Perhaps a trade agreement, or—" "You're hoping to avoid consequences for treating my mate poorly," Theron interrupted. "Let me be clear, Alpha Garrett. Isla has graciously suggested we not punish your pack for their actions. Against my better judgment, I've honored her wishes. But that protection extends only as far as her mercy. Test it again, and you'll discover I'm far less forgiving." Garrett swallowed hard. "Understood, Your Majesty. However," Isla said, an idea forming, "there is something you could do. Not for forgiveness. That's not owed. But for growth." Everyone turned to look at her with varying degrees of surprise. "Your pack needs to reconsider how you evaluate wolves," Isla continued, strength building with each word. "Strength isn't only physical. Value isn't only visible. If you truly regret what happened, prove it by changing your standards. Create opportunities for Omegas. Stop public rejection ceremonies. They're cruel regardless of who's being rejected. Build a pack culture where every wolf's gifts are recognized." Garrett looked stunned. Marcus's expression shifted to something like awe. "Yes," Garrett managed. "Yes, we can do that. We will do that." "Then we have no further business," Theron said dismissively. "Commander Ash will see you out." After they left, Theron pulled Isla into his arms, holding her tightly. "You were incredible. turning their apology into an opportunity for actual change. That was brilliant. I was terrified, Isla admitted against his chest. I know. That's what made it brave. He pulled back to look at her face, storm-gray eyes soft with love. 3 months ago, you would have accepted their apology and asked nothing in return. Now you demand better. That's growth, Isla. That's strength. I learned from the best, she said, reaching up to cup his face. You showed me what real strength looks like. We showed each other, Theron corrected, then kissed her deeply. That evening, as they walked through the garden beneath a full moon, Theron stopped at the fountain, the same place where Dame Kiara had first told Isla about his mother. I want to ask you something, he said, suddenly nervous in a way Isla had never seen. And you can say no. We can wait. There's no pressure. Theron, you're rambling. He laughed, running a hand through his hair. Right. Okay. Isla Thorne. He dropped to one knee, and Isla's breath caught. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my mate? Officially, permanently, in front of the moon and the territory and everyone who matters? Will you be my queen? My partner? My everything? Tears spilled down Isla's cheeks before she could stop them. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. Theron stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he set her down, he produced a ring, simple silver with a moonstone that glowed in the moonlight. It was my mother's, he said softly, sliding it onto her finger. She wore it every day until she died. Dame Kiara saved it for me. For the day I found someone worthy of it. Someone gentle and strong and absolutely perfect. It's beautiful, Isla whispered, watching the moonstone catch the light. Not as beautiful as you. Theron kissed her again, tender and reverent. I love you, Isla, more than I have words for. I love you too, Isla said. Always. Above them, the moon shone bright and full, witnessing their promise. And somewhere in the palace, Isla was certain, Dame Kiara was already planning the most spectacular bonding ceremony the Northern Territory had ever seen. Chapter 10. 1 year later, Isla stood in the Great Hall, wearing a gown of silver and blue that made her look like moonlight given form. The bonding ceremony had been everything Dame Kiara promised, elaborate and beautiful, and filled with representatives from every pack in the territory. But now, with the formal parts complete and the celebration in full swing, Isla slipped away to the tower, their tower, for a moment of peace. The view hadn't changed. Mountains still stretched toward infinity, forests still rolled in green waves, the sky still held impossible shades of twilight. But everything else was different. Isla was different. She moved with confidence now, spoke with authority, made decisions that affected thousands of lives. The frightened Omega from the Moonstone Pack felt like a distant memory, someone she'd been in another lifetime. I knew I'd find you here. Theron's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. He crossed to where she stood at the railing, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. Escaping your own party? Just taking a moment, Isla said, leaning into his embrace. It's overwhelming in the best way, but still overwhelming. I know the feeling. He rested his chin on top of her head, and they stood together watching the sun complete its descent. Happy? Deliriously, Isla confirmed, though I still sometimes can't believe this is my life, that I get to be here, with you, doing this. Believe it, Theron said firmly. You've earned every moment. This past year, watching you become the queen you were always meant to be, has been the greatest privilege of my life. It had been quite a year. Isla had implemented changes throughout the territory, establishing councils that included Omega voices, creating educational programs, reforming outdated traditions. The Moonstone Pack had actually followed through on their promises, implementing similar reforms. Alpha Garrett had even sent a letter thanking Isla for the guidance, though she suspected Vera had applied significant pressure behind the scenes. The curse hadn't returned even once. Theron's wolf remained calm, balanced, at peace in ways he'd never experienced before their bond. Master Benedict had examined him monthly for the first 6 months, searching for any sign of the Fury Binding's return, but found nothing. The curse was broken completely, permanently, miraculously. "I have news," Isla said, turning in Theron's arms to face him. Her heart raced with nervous excitement. Benedict confirmed it this morning. Theron's eyes widened, hope dawning. We're pregnant," Isla confirmed, watching joy explode across his face. "About 2 months along. Benedict says everything looks perfect." Theron made a sound between a laugh and a sob, pulling her close and burying his face in her neck. "A child. We're having a child. Are you happy?" Isla asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, eyes shining with unshed tears. "You've given me everything, Isla. Freedom from the curse, love I never thought I'd have, purpose beyond just ruling. And now a family. How did I get this lucky?" "We got lucky," Isla corrected. "Both of us. The moon brought us together. Then I owe the moon a debt I can never repay." Theron pressed his forehead to hers, and they breathed the same air, existing in perfect harmony. "I love you. So much it terrifies me sometimes." "I love you too," Isla whispered. "Always and forever." They returned to the celebration eventually, where Dame Kiara immediately knew something had changed just by looking at them. Her delighted squeal could probably be heard in the neighboring territories. Later, when the party finally ended and they retreated to their private chambers, no longer separate rooms but shared space that reflected both of them, Theron pulled Isla close beneath blankets that smelled like cedar and home. "Tell me what you're thinking," he murmured against her hair. "I'm thinking about that night," Isla said. "The rejection ceremony, how it felt like the worst moment of my life. And I'm grateful for it. Because if Marcus hadn't rejected me, if everything hadn't fallen apart exactly as it did, I wouldn't have been standing in that hall when you walked in. We wouldn't have found each other." Theron was quiet for a moment. "You're right. Every terrible thing that happened led us here. To this. To us," Isla agreed. Outside their window, the moon shone full and bright, the same moon that had witnessed a frightened Omega's humiliation and a king's dramatic rescue, the same moon that had watched them fall in love in a tower that was no longer lonely, the same moon that would watch their child grow, their kingdom flourish, their love deepen with each passing year. Isla had been rejected, humiliated, told she was inadequate and unsuitable and not enough. But she'd also been defended, chosen, loved beyond measure. She'd broken a curse with a touch, built a kingdom with compassion, found home in a pair of storm-colored eyes. And as sleep pulled her under, wrapped in the arms of her mate and king, Isla smiled. Because some stories that begin with rejection end with magic. And this was hers. The end. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this story moved you most? Was it the moment Theron walked into the rejection ceremony? The breaking of the Fury binding? Isla's growth from frightened Omega to confident queen? The tower conversations? The moment they confessed their love? Comment below. I read all comments and love hearing what resonated with you. And tell me, do you want more stories like this? Stories about rejected wolves finding their true mates, about gentle strength proving more powerful than anyone expected, about alpha kings who choose with their hearts? Stories where being exactly yourself is the greatest magic of all? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any episodes. We post videos every day with intense emotional stories full of twists and turns. Thank you for listening to the